It is time for the Sportsmemo College Football Every Game on the Board podcast. We're starting with Thursday night games, and we got Friday night games, and then some of Saturday's games with today's guest, Rob Veno. Robbie, welcome in. How you doing today?
I am doing great today, Drew. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. Excited to get your opinion on some of these games. Weekday games look pretty good. Saturday's early slate looks pretty good as well. You got some good games here. You excited to get into college football betting starting on Thursday?
Absolutely, buddy. Always am.
All right, let's start off at the top. 105-106, Texas Tech at TCU. Looks like the Horned Frogs laying 7 at home, 61.5 the total, Robbie.
Yeah, and they might be in a little bit better shape where the quarterback situation is concerned here, Drew. It looks like the week off for TCU made it possible for Sean Robinson to play in this game. I read reports that said he may not start, but he will play. That's good news for TCU to have Sean Robinson in the lineup here. For Texas Tech, it's a little dicier because Alan Bowman, the collapsed lung, we don't know exactly if he'll be able to play in this game. Now they have gotten, or they did get, pretty good backup quarterback play in their last game from Jet Duffy, the third quarterback that they've been through so far this year. I mean, McLean Carter started out the season. Bowman set the world on fire, replacing an injured Carter, and then Jet Duffy, who kind of brought a dual threat capability to their last game against West Virginia, where they came from way off the pace and made it close at the end. I do think, though, that Bowman is the better option here, and I'd be very hesitant to play Texas Tech without him in this game. I think Robinson, certainly for TCU, will bolster them. The last 3 games, and I know people are souring on TCU somewhat, but the last 3 games they've played, knowing what we know now, Ohio State, which we knew was a top 5 caliber team, but Texas, which we now see inside the top 10, and Iowa State, which has played very well as of late. TCU's been through a gauntlet of sorts their last 3 games. I think a little bit tougher than what Texas Tech has been through over the course of their last 3 games. So I give TCU a little bit of a scheduling edge at this point in the season. Home field, might not be too worried about laying 7.5 here. I mean, you always have to worry about the the Texas Tech pass offense covering numbers, but my power ratings show TCU to be 9.5 better. That indicates maybe there's a little value on that side. I think the week off, although they both had it, I think it does TCU a little more good, and I would look toward their side in that game.
And Robbie, we got a doubleheader on Thursday. Actually going at the same time here. One in the Big 12 we just talked about. Also, one in the Sun Belt. We got Georgia Southern at Texas State. Looks like Georgia Southern laying 17.5 on the road in San Marcos, with 49 being the total.
Boy, 5-0 against the spread so far this year. I mean, between Appalachian State and Georgia Southern, just mechanically betting those 2 Sun Belt teams each and every week has profited anybody who's tended to do so. For Georgia Southern, it obviously comes down to their running game against Texas State's run defense, which is not great. I think that the numbers of 168.4 allowed per game on the ground are a little bit skewed, somewhat because of opponents, somewhat because teams find it easier to pass on Texas State. Bottom line is, you can't really foresee any problems, Drew, for Shai Werts, Wesley Fields, and that Georgia Southern running game against Texas State here. They should be able to produce. They should be able to put up points. They had a big second half last week against South Alabama. The situational thing that comes into play here is Georgia Southern only having 4 days rest and Texas State coming off a bye, much more time to prepare. The difference in caliber of teams, maybe that doesn't matter whatsoever. But still, it's something to consider in this game. I think there could be a brewing quarterback controversy at Texas State. Willie Jones III, a quarterback that head coach Everett Withers had really begun to like a lot and trust his as he progressed and got better and better. But he got injured a couple of games ago, and the last 2 games have been started by true freshman Tyler Vitt, who last week had a really strong week, 73% completions. I believe the exact numbers were like 29 of 49 or 29 of 39, excuse me. So Texas State has found a way now to throw the football around the lot with pretty good accuracy. I don't know which quarterback they'll go with here. Jones is still listed as questionable. He's far more the dual threat quarterback than Vitt. I think that it would make a difference to me as to whether or not I play the total here. I think the quarterback, the true freshman Tyler Vitt, throwing the football might have a little more success against that Georgia Southern defense than would the more run-oriented quarterback Willie Jones III. We'll see who's available for this game. Total sits at 49. Still a potential play here if Vitt gets named the starter.
Robbie, you said Texas State played Lafayette last week, though. They did. They were at home. So did want to just mention that. So it is kind of – because that is a big part of this handicap, actually, is Georgia Southern on the road. You're right, 4 days. It is a big advantage to the home team having to travel that. But at the same time, it's a big disadvantage for Texas State going against an option-style offense and not having extra time to prepare. That's the only reason I wanted to point that out, is because they did play Lafayette, so they're having the accelerated prep time for Georgia Southern, which can be difficult and is a very key part of this handicap. So bringing that in, I mean, I guess 17.5 being the ultimate equalizer as far as the line goes. But would you have a lean sidewise, knowing that going in?
You know, the lean would have to be toward Georgia Southern sidewise, Drew, because the lack of preparation time to face the option against, as opposed to the lack of preparation time facing an offense that up until last week, second half, really has struggled somewhat until they found their passing game, Texas State. I think that's a huge advantage for Georgia Southern. And, of course, there's a defensive edge here for Georgia Southern as well. And I don't know how I got that all messed up saying Texas State was off a bye week, but you are correct. Lafayette beats them 42-27 last week. And like I say, the second half was pretty good for Texas State. And Tyler Vitt showed a lot throwing the football against the porous ULL defense. No doubt Georgia Southern's a little tighter in that respect, but Georgia Southern has had their issues in certain spots this year defending the pass. So it'll be an interesting call whoever Withers winds up using at quarterback in that game.
Robbie, let's move to Friday's action. We got USF at Tulsa. Looks like USF 7 pretty much across the board. There is a 7.5 at Chris. We got 62 being the total, this one in Tulsa. How would you look to bet this AAC matchup?
Well, I think what we saw last week, Drew, when Tulsa finally went with Seth Boomer at quarterback was – a lot of the stuff you would expect from a first-time starter. He showed some real potential in the passing game, and then he showed to be mistake-prone at times. Tulsa had the lead in that game heading into the fourth quarter, where they just totally collapsed. They lose the fourth quarter 24-3 to Houston in that game, but it looks like Boomer is going to get his second career start. And despite the overall numbers, 13-31, 41.9%, the 13 completions did turn into 227 yards, which I think is something that Philip Montgomery had been looking for, a little bit more, that downfield vertical attack out of his Tulsa offense. Defensively, they've held up for the most part until that fourth quarter last week. Offensively has been the challenge. For South Florida has not been great on the defensive side of the football, and maybe there's some areas that Tulsa can exploit here. I think it really comes down to both ground games. Each of these teams, Drew, average over 200 yards per game on the ground, and they both allow over 200 per game on the ground. So you can run the football to set up the pass. Do you trust the South Florida passing game more than Tulsa's? I probably do. I think South Florida's got speed that Tulsa's going to have to deal with here. So maybe laying points with that South Florida side is the right way to go. But I do think, total-wise, this one sits just a little bit low to me. I think despite the fact that Tulsa has had a decent defensive start to the season, I think the speed they'll contend with here really is going to be tough. Houston showed last week that when push came to shove, they could get that ball downfield and they could move the football pretty well. So maybe South Florida does the same here.
That one starts at 7 o'clock Eastern. We got two here on the late slate for Friday night. 111, 112, Arizona, Utah in the Pac-12. 51.5 the total. 13.5 the Utes laying at home, Robbie. And this one being in Salt Lake City, I'll tell you, both of these two teams off of great weeks. I had this game circled thinking both teams would actually lose, Utah to Stanford, Arizona to Cal, but didn't end up going that way. So it's interesting to see if that changes the power rating. I was hoping to be on the Utes, but 13.5 with a team that has struggled scoring is a little bit scary. I haven't played it yet. Do you have any opinion on this one?
Well, power rating showed Utah should only be 10.5, Drew, so there is some padding there, and I think it certainly comes from the job they did against Stanford last week, 40-21 win. Of course, Stanford minus Bryce Love. That makes a big difference in that Stanford offense and their ability to play action when you just don't respect the run game whatsoever. For Utah, though, I'll say this. Quarterback Tyler Huntley had not played that well all season long. In fact, he had played pretty poorly all season long until that game last week. Now, it's obviously a decision of the guy when you go to the counter to bet the game. Your decision is that more of a mirage, or is that more indicative of the Tyler Huntley that we saw last year that you would expect to perform pretty well? I mean, he's 17 of 21 last week, 81% completions against that Stanford defense. They ran the ball down Stanford's throat. Their defense was extremely tough. Like I said, when you don't have to deal with Love, it's a different story. I just don't know what to make out of Huntley's play here, because it could turn in an instant here against an Arizona defense that, to me, has been far better than I ever expected them to be. Kevin Sumlin kind of comes in. He does come in to Tucson with an offensive reputation, and it's been quite the opposite due to the injury to Khalil Tate. He's played basically hurt all season long. The defense has been what's carried them. Tate looked a little better last week, Drew, and I said this 2 weeks ago, because I thought in that USC game maybe his health would get better. It didn't. Their offense has suffered for it. It's a tough road to hoe against this Utah defense if he's still not anywhere near, let's say, 90% of the quarterback that he's supposed to be. So I think you're probably looking at a defensive-minded game here. Totals come down 53 down to 51.5. I think that's to be expected, and perhaps maybe there's a little value there. I haven't played this game either way yet, and I doubt that I will. I will say this to those listening who play first half or second half wagers. There are a lot of teams now that are developing huge splits in their first half play and their second half play. 6 games, 5-6 games, a pretty good time to start trusting these numbers. When it comes to Arizona, in first half action this year, they're 1-5 against the spread. In second half action, they're 5-1 against the spread. A lot of times coming from behind, but it really does give some credence and credit to the adjustments that head coach Sumlin and his coaching staff are making second half here. So if you do play those particular options in games first and second half, Arizona slow starter, strong finisher so far this season. And
Robbie, that was 1-5 in the first half, 5-1 in the second half?
Yeah.
That is a big discrepancy. That's a great find right there. We got 113, 114 Air Force San Diego State. Looks like this one totaled at 45. SDSU minus 11 at home.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about the Air Force quarterback situation. There's 3 guys there that are all capable. When you look at an injury report, you tend to see quarterback injured, and you maybe shy away from that team. Where Air Force is concerned, if you were to put them in any type of pecking order, you would have to start with Isaiah Sanders at the top, and he'll be your starting quarterback. He should have been your starting quarterback here, but it looks like Donald Hammond III is going to go. I don't know that that's the best decision, Drew. I've seen all 3 of these guys play. Heading into the season, I thought Arian Wortham was the best quarterback. It hasn't turned out that way this year. Sanders really, to me, the best choice out of the three, but it's going to be Ham in the third here, according to all reports. And for that reason, I would tend to lean towards San Diego State, a team that lost their starting quarterback, Christian Chapman, a few weeks back, a team that lost their starting tailback, Juwan Washington, a couple of weeks back. But there doesn't seem to be any drop-off. In fact, a lot of the things that I've read coming straight from San Diego State beat writers are they're better off with Ryan Agnew at quarterback than they were with Christian Chapman. And if you watched the Boise State game last week, one thing's for sure, Rocky Long's defense continues to be rock solid. They've been great all season long. He's especially adept at taking care of this Air Force option. He's done it for years. The Air Force option hasn't really been able to do much against them. Expect much of the same here. And for my money, having what I believe is one of the – not the best quarterback going for Air Force, the best thrower of the football, I think Sanders is that. I think that goes against Air Force even more. Lines picked up here, going from 9.5 to 11. I think the money's correct, even though power ratings showed this game to only be San Diego State -9. Going back to the Eastern Michigan game of a couple of weeks ago, Drew, remember we had that game on our podcast at San Diego State.
Yeah, I do.
And they were laying double digits then, and we were both in pretty much agreement. It's hard to play SDSU when they're laying double digits because you just can't trust the offense. That would be the only thing that holds me back here. I think all the fundamentals suggest San Diego State should win rather easily. I don't mind both of the number twos playing quarterback and running back. Chase Jasmine looks real good. But despite the fundamentals here, you still are a little leery of laying 11 points with San Diego State.
Yeah, and what are the reasonings, just real quick, that what Agnew, the backup quarterback, you think's better than Chapman?
Well, it wouldn't be me. I mean, I watched him play last week, but in articles that I've read, beat writers seem to think Agnew, the more accurate passer than Chapman. Chapman's great at making something out of nothing, so to speak. He's got pretty good elusiveness. He can make plays with his legs, but really Christian Chapman hasn't been a pusher of the football down the field. Now, that doesn't necessarily go with Rocky Long's offensive philosophy either, pushing the ball down the field. But when they like to throw the ball intermediate and deep, most believe Agnew the better of the two throwing the football, and probably the more production potential with Agnew than with Chapman. So far, we haven't really seen much of a drop-off here. To go into Boise and win that game 19-13 last week against a really tough Boise defense, I think was real good for San Diego State. We'll see how they play from here, Drew, because much like Utah with Huntley, this San Diego State offense can be very week to week and very sporadic. So, again, I know we both agreed on this a couple of weeks ago and probably do again, just laying double digits with SDSU. And you know what? They got off to a big lead against Eastern Michigan and could not sustain it and didn't cover that game. It would be the only thing holding me back from playing them here.
We got 115-116 onto the Saturday card now. Louisville, Boston College in the ACC, 61 the total, with BC laying 13.5 at home, Robbie.
Yeah, boy, they use special teams. I mean, NC State, I should say, tried to give that game away last week against Boston College. And, in fact, point spread-wise, they did give the game away at the end. They only win by 5 against Boston College, who played without their star tailback, A.J. Dillon. They did not look good offensively whatsoever. Happened to be in Raleigh last weekend with that game taking place. So caught about 70-75% of that one. And once again, without A.J. Dillon, BC did not look good moving the football. A couple of special teams gaffes kept that game close. Louisville seems to be coming on a little bit as of late. Juwan Pass, more recently, has looked a little more like the quarterback everybody projected him to be heading into the season. You know, Bobby Petrino has that famous saying, throw it down the hashes. He likes to go vertical. He prefers to have a pocket passer quarterback. That's what fits his style better. And heading into the year, everybody thought Juwan Pass fit that. Unfortunately, not having Lamar Jackson back there anymore hurt Louisville offensively. And still, they're not good offensively. But I thought they played a real good game last week against in their contest, and the week before when they got nipped at the end by Florida State. I thought Louisville looked a little better. So 13.5 here to me looks very, very strong. Steve Adazio's defense hasn't been as good as it was to start the season. Certainly is not a vintage edition of BC defense. So I think you probably have two teams going different directions here right now, Drew. What we've seen the last 3 weeks out of BC, what we've seen the last couple of weeks out of Louisville would indicate Louisville up, BC down. Taking 13.5 would be my way in that game. Total here is 61. It seems a little bit high to me as well.
A good one here in the ACC, staying here, 117-118, Miami at Virginia. Looks like the Canes laying 6.5 on the road, 48.5 the total in Charlottesville, Robbie.
Yeah, and they have to come back off of that draining 28-27 win over Florida State last week, and now you have to handle Bryce Perkins, the dual threat quarterback for Virginia. And also go up against an extremely tough Virginia defense. So this is not an easy situation for Miami to bounce back quickly and come and cover a fairly decent-sized road number of 6.5. You know, it's a shame they lose Amon Richards for good now. He had to quit football because of the neck injury. The wide receiver for Miami of Florida, really when he was on the field, was their most explosive player over the last couple of seasons. They've done well without him, but to have him added to that arsenal would help. N'Kosi Perry, I think, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions last week. Again, very, very good play out of him. So Virginia will be pushed as well. This game, Drew, for whatever reason, has pushed down total-wise from 49.5 to 47.5. Now, we're only sitting here on Wednesday afternoon doing this podcast, and with the hurricane that's going to hit the top of Florida, the panhandle portion of Florida, later this afternoon, you wonder how quickly and to what regions that rain will travel. Perhaps rain gets in the way of this contest in Virginia, in Charlottesville by the time Saturday comes. We'll have to really keep a close eye on the weather forecast as that storm progresses, at least where heavy rains are concerned. We saw some real heavy rains last week affect the outcomes of some games. So that's something to pay attention to here. Again, I'd worry a little bit about Miami. They exerted a lot of effort in that win last week, but it's a Coastal Division game, Drew, and they've bounced back pretty good off of that LSU loss to start the season, and they're beginning to gain a little bit more national attention. You would hope that they could handle it here and take care of this game, but I'm not so sure. If it's a dry track, I kind of like over 47.5.
We got Toledo at Eastern Michigan. This one, pick or Toledo -1. Looks like 63.5 the total, Robbie.
Yeah, without Mitchell Guadagni at quarterback last week, Toledo still managed to shred the Bowling Green defense, which is not saying much. Eastern Michigan, a definite step up in defensive ability from Bowling Green. Almost anything is. We might not see him again this week, Drew, and it's about time Eastern Michigan wins a game, right? This poor team has gone through more close calls, more gut-wrenching losses than probably anybody in college football so far this season. So many losses by 3 points, the 7-point loss to Buffalo. They were actually behind for most of that game, so that wasn't as tough as the SDSU come from behind overtime loss, the 3 overtime loss to Northern Illinois. This team's probably ready to attack a Toledo defense that hasn't been good all season long. Don't expect Toledo to get better defensively overnight, so I think Eastern Michigan, which hasn't, it's not an extremely dynamic offense, but I think that this is a good matchup for them. +1 at home. I think Toledo's a bit overrated, Drew, just based on the fact that they are such a one-dimensional team. It's an extremely potent offense with an extremely vulnerable defense, and I think at this point in time to go on the road against one of the max better defenses and lay even 1 point, to me, is probably too much. So I'm not there yet, but I'm leaning toward playing Eastern Michigan in this contest. Power ratings have the game lined right about where it is right now, so no real value there. I think Eastern Michigan's in a good spot in that game.
Interesting matchup here, cross division in the SEC. Texas A&M traveling to Columbia to play South Carolina. Looks like the Aggies laying 2 on the road, 52.5 the total, Robbie.
Yeah, I would probably look that way. Texas A&M under Jimbo Fisher has become a real good defensive team, and boy, are they good against the run. And they will make South Carolina one-dimensional in this game. And whether or not Jake Bentley, it looks like he's going to play here, so I'm going with the idea that he's the starting quarterback here. All indications are that he will be. Jake Bentley, Deebo Samuel, can they penetrate this Texas A&M defense enough with only a passing game? I would doubt it. I would really doubt it. I think that A&M, their ability to stuff the run is so good. I think they're ranked 4 in the country right now against the run, only allowing 82 yards a game. It's troublesome for South Carolina, a team that I don't think can move the ball consistently enough on the offensive side. Last week against Missouri, to me, they benefited from that, what I would refer to as a monsoon, before they actually delayed the game for, I think, 90 minutes or so. South Carolina came out of that delay pretty fired up, wind up winning by 2 on the last play of the game. This is a totally different matchup for them, though, Drew, and I don't like it. If South Carolina can't run the football, I don't necessarily like them as an offensive option. So I would look at A&M in this contest. I think what Fisher has done there so quickly, I'm really surprised at how good they are defensively this quickly, coming off of what we saw last year, and the fact that he had to install a completely new defense, completely new offense. Like what I'm seeing, I'd probably look at A&M in that game.
Robbie, we got heading to the Sun Belt here. ULM at Coastal Carolina. Looks like this one 66 the total. Not looking for a lot of stops here with these two defenses, but looks like Coastal laying 6.5 at home. This one near Myrtle Beach. Not sure if that could be affected by rain as well. But how would you look to bet ULM Coastal Carolina?
Well, I think that you have to look, first of all, like you said, Drew, not a lot of defense, and the worst defensive unit on the field in that game will be the ULM pass defense. So the fact that Kilton Anderson, the quarterback for Coastal, returns in this contest, I think they could put up huge numbers offensively in this game. Now, all that being said, Caleb Evans and that ULM offense, which came back to life a little bit last week, I think could put up huge numbers against the Coastal defense as well. So the total is in a good spot. They're asking both of these teams basically to score 34 to get over the number. Question has to be, do you believe they can do that or not? And with good weather, I don't think it's much of a problem for these two sides. The one thing that sticks out to me and would be somewhat of a deterrent is the dud that UL Monroe laid offensively a couple of weeks ago when they played Georgia State, and just for whatever reason couldn't do anything against the Georgia State defense. It hasn't done much to stop anybody all season long. ULM could only get to the 14 mark. So that somewhat would make me nervous to play over and would lean me into the Coastal Carolina camp a little bit more. 6.5 points, though, is quite a few for Coastal to lay at home. So a lot of decisions to be made in this particular game. Some based on weather, some based on, how good do you believe the ULM offense is. I think it's been a little underachieving so far, but could achieve big here. Total-wise, maybe I would look that way, Drew, but we'll have to see how that field and the weather conditions are come game time. Could be a good game to play over the total, though.
Robbie, heading up to the Big Ten, we got Purdue at Illinois. Looks like the Boilermakers laying 10.5 on the highway, 62 the total.
Well, you know how I love to take everything that I hear Jeff Brom, the head coach of Purdue, say as gospel truth when it comes to college football, and especially the performance of his team. And listening to him at his Big Ten press conference on Monday afternoon, I don't think you can expect anything less than a shootout in this contest. The Purdue offense, which, remember, heading into the season, he said they weren't grasping his offensive scheme. They would have to be creative in order to make plays. Somewhere at around the third game of the year, that Missouri game, something clicked with Purdue, and it clicked because they decided as a coaching staff that they were just going to push the ball down the field. David Blau winds up being a very good deep thrower of the football, and they've got speed on the field to get past defenders. So Purdue's become an explosive offensive team against the Illinois pass defense that doesn't stop the pass at all. These two teams, Drew, they rank 119 and 117 nationally against the pass. So you have A.J. Bush, who returned to quarterback last week for Illinois, and all of a sudden Illinois was very productive on offense. David Blau on the other side. Jeff Brom said that Bush creates a lot of problems for their defensive side of the football, which now seems to be the weakness of Purdue. And I think, the line movement in this game, as far as total is concerned, was huge, or has been huge, off of the opener. And I have to agree with it. It may get to a point where it becomes just too high, but right now, we've seen it go from 56 to 62. I think bettors are on to the fact that this is going to be an up and down the field game here. Jeff Brom didn't seem to believe that this Tampa 2 defense utilized by Illinois, which isn't seen that much in college football, didn't seem to think that would be a monster problem for Purdue to solve. I don't think it will either. I'll look at that game and see if we can find enough value in the over.
We got about 5 games left here, Robbie, and just want to give a shout-out to you, man. Having a great season, up almost 8 units on the year overall in NFL and college football. And, guys, his 4 and 5% plays, which are the old 15 and 20 stars from the old Sportsmemo, the top plays pretty much, which he'll have on the website at sportsmemo.com this weekend. He's 30 and 17, 64% plus 20 units on the year. So make sure to check out Robbie Veno's college football and NFL season service. We got 129-128 Ball State, or 127-128 Ball State Central Michigan here, Robbie, in the MAC. 54 the total right now at Chris. Looks like CMU laying 3 at home. How would you look to bet this one?
Yeah, Ball State ran into a defensive buzzsaw last week, Drew, and their offensive performances have been, inconsistent at best. However, if you examine the defenses that they've played, let's face it, Notre Dame, a very good defense on a national level as far as top 10 teams are concerned. Indiana, under Tom Allen, a very good defensive team. And Northern Illinois, probably the best defensive team inside the MAC. So 3 of their 6 games have been played against very, very good defensive teams. And, Riley Neal, James Gilbert and company just couldn't find ways to move the football against those opponents. The other opponents that they've played, it's been a different story, and they have found ways to move the football. I think that comes into play here against Central Michigan. I could really see this game getting up and down the field. Central has had their difficulties on the offensive side as well. But again, they've had to play Michigan State. They've had to play Kentucky. They've had to play Northern Illinois. Just a pointer for those who handicap throughout the week and tend to use averages for teams on offense, offensive averages, rushing, passing, defensive averages, rushing, passing, using them as a guideline. Sometimes you have to dissect them a little further and just go through the opposition. For both of these teams, it's been a very tough road against some very good defenses. Ball State has shown more ability when they've got outside of those really tough defenses than has Central Michigan. But I do expect CMU to have one of their best days here against this Ball State defense, which isn't great. I don't think it'll be enough, though. Ball State, to me, +3 could be a good side here. Over 54 seems to be a real good play to me. That one I've got a little check mark next to, and we'll see if that makes the card this week.
Robbie, in the ACC, an interesting one here. These two teams know each other. Duke traveling to Atlanta, playing Georgia Tech there in Bobby Dodd, with Georgia Tech laying 3 at home, 55 the total. Duke off of a bye. They did have that bad loss against Virginia Tech, national TV. A lot of eyeballs on them. Is this a buy low opportunity on Duke with extra time to prepare for the option offense?
Well, and I think that obviously a factor. I think the fact that the bye came the week after Daniel Jones, the quarterback, returned to the lineup is just as big, just as important. Daniel Jones into the lineup in that Virginia Tech game didn't look like Daniel Jones. Virginia Tech, we know, has difficulty, especially in their secondary. Duke didn't do much offensively in that game. I think the bye week helps the quarterback as much as it helps the Duke defense here. So you get both sides of the football helped by that off week for the Duke Blue Devils here. Georgia Tech, interesting last week that Paul Johnson, the head coach of Georgia Tech, chose to kind of rub it in to Louisville in that Friday night game, scored a bunch of points, 66 all in all, and really wasn't apologetic for running up the score. Has a real discrepancy with the Louisville defensive coordinator who made some derogatory marks years ago about the triple option offense and how it was not the way of the future. So Johnson showed him what the triple option offense could do to his defense. And I don't know that flies here against Duke. I think Cutcliffe will have his defense. This is a real good defense. A real good defense. We don't normally associate that sentence with Duke Blue Devils football, but they've got guys throughout that back seven especially that have an opportunity to play NFL football. I like the bye week here. It's not something that you can use as a blanket statement when you're handicapping that a bye week benefits a team. But I do think that it benefits both sides of the football here with Duke, and I'd have no problem taking 3 points with them in that game.
We'll head to the Big Ten. Rutgers, Maryland. Looks like Maryland laying a big number here at home. 25.5, 52 the total, Robbie.
I tell you what, if you listen to Chris Ash, the head coach of Rutgers, speak and put that up against what a disaster the Rutgers football season has been so far, you'd come out of that little speech and you'd run through a brick wall for that guy. He's got more positives. I don't know how he even makes positives out of what Rutgers is doing so far this season, which, as I mentioned, has been a complete disaster. That's not news to anybody following college football. We know Rutgers has been a complete and total mess, but yet Ash finds reasons in this press conference that I saw Monday to try and force you to believe that his team is making progress in the second half of the year is going to be much better for this Scarlet Knights team. And you know what, Drew? You come out and you halfway believe it, and then you go and look at the numbers and you say, man, this guy's just a bunch of coach talk trying to pick up his team. I don't know that they can do much here against Maryland. Last week, I didn't think that Maryland could run the football against Michigan. Therefore, I liked Michigan. When Maryland can run the football, they're a different offensive team. And this week, they should be able to run it pretty well against Rutgers. Rutgers quarterback play in due time. Their freshman quarterback's probably going to be a star in the Big Ten, but right now he's so mistake-prone, and Maryland can capitalize on those mistakes. Not in the business of laying 25.5, but there's no way I want to take those points with Rutgers either. This game could get out of control. The total's been bet down from 54.5 to 52, and I think that's solely based on the fact that whatever money has pushed that game down just believes that Rutgers can't score points. I don't want to argue with that. It's a tough game to bet either way, Drew. I really don't see value in either side there.
Guys, I want to give out a coupon code here, Veno49. That's Veno 49 at checkout. You can get Rob Veno's college football service. Really is all access all week for half off. Normally $99, only $49 with that coupon code. That's Veno49 at checkout. Rob's a great option for college football and NFL. He's up almost 8 units on the year, and we already mentioned the 4- and 5-star plays have just been amazing, up 20 units, so hitting 64% on those for the year. That's Veno49 at checkout. Robbie, 2 more games here, 133, 134, Virginia Tech, UNC, Va Tech laying 5.5 on the highway, 58 the total in Chapel Hill.
You know, it seems to me that the bye week helps here too. It helps UNC, who right before the bye in that Miami game, Drew, you witnessed that game close up and personal. That's when they got the entirety of their suspended players back. They got a few back the week before against Pittsburgh, got them all back against Miami, get destroyed 47-10, go into the bye week 1-1 inside the conference and 1-1 inside the Coastal Division, ready to come out and play a big Coastal Division game against Virginia Tech. I think they'll be fired up. I think they'll be as well prepared as they've been prepared for any game so far this season. And I also believe, Drew, that we'll probably get back to seeing Larry Fedora-style football here as far as the passing game and the tempo is concerned. Virginia Tech, secondary-wise, is an absolute injury mess right now. They had a serious lack of depth heading into the Notre Dame game last week. They suffered another key injury in that defensive backfield last week against Notre Dame. For those who watched it, having the Metallica Jumbotron salute and the Enter Sandman, everything was great until they kicked off and Notre Dame just pounded Virginia Tech into submission. I think UNC is going to be good offensively here. Like Ryan Willis at quarterback pushing the ball downfield for Virginia Tech as well. You could get in this game, in my estimation, something like what we saw with Virginia Tech and ODU a couple of weeks back, an up-and-down style of game here. Total looks a little low here. I think that's just a lack of, anybody thinking that North Carolina is North Carolina offensively at this point in time. But I think this is a good game for them to break out, and I don't see Virginia Tech having much trouble with the UNC defense either when Ryan Willis throws the ball. So over 58 to me looks like a possible play.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I mean, as far as the side, the number kind of stuck out to me. I thought Virginia Tech would be favored by a lot more, and I was actually looking to bet UNC just because at one point in that Miami game, Robbie, I think UNC actually played a lot better than the score indicates. I think it was the beginning of the third quarter. I looked up at the stats. And UNC was outgaining Miami. I know they didn't outgain them for the full game, but they were down like 40-10, and they were actually outgaining Miami. It was just the way it turned out with the big turnovers and the big plays were all Miami side. But yeah, I think UNC might be a little under the radar here going forward. So I'd be careful if you're just blanket looking to bet Virginia Tech on the road. Robbie, last game here. 135, 136, and then we'll be back tomorrow to start it off with Houston, East Carolina, and finish out the college football card and podcast scheduling. We got the Friday slate being the NFL every game on the board. But last game here for this podcast, Western Kentucky and Charlotte. We're ending it with a big one, Robbie. WKU and Charlotte, the 49ers. We got WKU laying 7.5 on the road, 44.5 the total, Robbie.
Yeah, it's hard to say a lot that's positive about either side here, Drew, but I was talking to you off air before we came on the podcast, and as I said to you then, it's not saying a heck of a lot, but Western Kentucky, in my estimation, is playing a little bit better. You just take a look at their last three games, especially from the defensive side. They've only allowed 20 points to Louisville, 20 points to Ball State, 20 points to Marshall. Those are good defensive numbers here. Problem for Mike Sanford's team has been quarterback injuries, offensive line problems with position switches due to injury. Bye week last week, and heading into Marshall, they thought a lot of those offensive line problems were solved. Thought he had found himself a quarterback finally, and then he gets a bye week to prepare and get his team even further along, and I think this is a good spot for them. Power ratings made the game 9.5, the game open 9.5, so that number was right on the mark. I don't trust Charlotte's defense whatsoever at this point in time, so I think there's a discrepancy there in favor of Western Kentucky. And if the offensive line issues, and if quarterback Stephen Duncan gets, it becomes a little more accustomed to running this offense, which with the bye week it should help, I think they can win a game finally and win a game by double digits. To me, Charlotte doesn't pose much of a threat. Total here has gone way, way down, Drew. I'm showing 42.5 right now off of an opener of 48. I wonder if weather is going to affect this game again. Be on the lookout for that in some of these southern cities and, mid-Atlantic as this storm creeps through after hitting Florida. It could make some trouble in some of these games, but for me right now, I disagree thoroughly with the fact that the Charlotte side has been bet here from 9.5 down to 7.5, and again, that could be a correlating parlay based upon potential weather conditions, playing underdog at that price and under together, thinking it'd be a sloppy, low-scoring game. I think Western Kentucky is the better side, though, and put a little bit of an asterisk or a little bit of an up arrow next to this team because I think second half of the season will bring better results for WKU.
All right, Robbie, great podcast. And guys, remember the coupon code Veno49 to get his college football and NFL all access for 7 days for only $49. That's half off. Veno49 at checkout. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow to finish up the College Football Every Game on the Board podcast.